Afternoon folks, welcome back. Apologies for the slight delay in videos recently. I did say I was going to be very busy through autumn, and so it's proved. But on to today's video. Now, I wanted to do something a little bit different from what I normally do and do more of a educational type video, should we say. I don't do an awful lot of that sort of stuff on this channel. I much prefer being out in the landscape than behind a desk. Now, don't worry, I am going to be out shooting some landscapes very shortly in this video. But it's something, well, this topic of this video is something that's cropped up an awful lot in recent workshops I've been doing, probably more so than normal, and that is composing your wide angle photography. Now, it's probably the most popular area of landscape photography, shooting at wider focal length, so hopefully you'll be able to get something from this video. So without further ado, let's jump into a few of my top tips, or whatever you want to call them, into how you can improve your wide angle photography. Right, number one, you're shooting too many rocks, and I'm telling you, you're shooting too many rocks. I'm joking, of course, but shooting rocks in foregrounds in landscape photography is something that is as old as time, and it's understandable because it doesn't matter where you are in the landscape. Rocks are an abundant thing, so if you're up a mountain or you're at a shoreline, even in a woodland, you can usually find rocks to work with, and they make an easy sort of win for the landscape photographer in composing a foreground. Now, what I would argue is that if you're finding yourself just putting a random rock or a set of rocks in a foreground just to fill a gap in the image, it probably doesn't work, because what a lot of people don't realise, especially beginners, is that when you're shooting at wider focal lengths, anything from sort of 20mm and wider, your foreground is taking up about 2/3 of the image. So that's a lot of the image that you better make sure is interesting and composed well. So if you find yourself just plonking a rock there just to fill a space, then think twice, I would say. What I always ask myself when I'm considering putting rocks in a foreground is two things. Firstly, does it complement the wider landscape? Is it an integral part of the landscape, and does it fit in with the character of the landscape? If it doesn't, it's probably not that interesting. The second thing, and more specific to the foreground itself, is do those rocks or a rock have any interesting patterns or colours or textures or shapes, anything that makes it stand out and interesting? Because the key here is, well, the clue's in the title, foreground interest. It has to be interesting. If it's not interesting and it's just a random ugly shaped rock that you're just putting there to fill a space, then don't do it. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, so we're going to head out to WASTWATER and have a look at some rocks. So, I was talking about shooting too many rocks. I'm going to contradict myself and shoot some rocks. But yeah, I think this is a good illustration of the point I'm trying to make, in that you really need to consider the wider landscape, and are those rocks that you're shooting complementary to that. Now, we're down at WASTWATER here, and the conditions this evening are absolutely stunning. But anyone who's been here will know that it's a very wild, rugged landscape, and the rocks that line the shoreline here really reflect that, I think. So that's influenced my decision to shoot this classic rock in a foreground composition. The rocks that we've got in front of me here, there's lots of little ones strewn about, so they do take a little bit of figuring out to get the composition right here. Lots of interesting shapes and jagged edges and all that sort of stuff, so it ticks the boxes in terms of complementing the wider landscape and is it interesting. But it's took a little bit of figuring out, just making sure that the rocks are separated from this little line of a reflection that we've got going on. That's pretty rare for WASTWATER. It's usually blowing a gale down here. And yeah, I mean, the shot itself, nothing too complex. I've got the 6-stop on, just taking off that ripple on the water there, about 6-second exposure, f11, and I'm using the Samyang 12mm prime that I use for all my video stuff. So good little test of this. I haven't really done any stills photography with this camera yet in about 18 months of owning it. So yeah, this is the Fuji XS10. My camera, my big camera, my Z7's away getting repaired at the minute. So no problem, because this is a more than able stand-in. So we're going to take this shot and see how it looks. So hopefully you found that little bit on rocks interesting there. The main message I want to get across from that is that when you're considering shooting rocks in foregrounds, because there's such a popular thing to do, you perhaps need to give it a little bit of extra thought and shoot it with a bit more of a level of intent, I think. But that's the main takeaway I want to get across there. Right, on to the next one. So this next one I think is particularly useful when you're shooting in overcast conditions, which is something that I think we all face a lot of the time. And that is using sharply contrasting colour or texture to the wider scene in your foregrounds. Now I'm going to show you an example on the screen here of an image that I took a few years ago, also at WASTWATER. Now these conditions, the day I took this, are much more in keeping with what you'll find at WASTWATER a lot of the time, very moody and overcast, that sort of thing. And when I took this, I was really sort of struggling to make something work, because the whole scene was very mid-tone, it was very grey, very subdued colours and not an awful lot going on. So my first thought was to find something to break some of that up. Now when I was walking along the shoreline, I found this one little rock that was partially submerged in the water, with a very, very vivid orange reddy area on the top of it. And I looked at that and I thought, even though it's very small, because the rest of the scene is all pretty much one shade of grey, this will work quite well in contrasting against that. So I got set up and got really low down to the shot. I had the polarizer on to bring that colour out, and I think this one works really well. Good example of using a small amount of very vivid colour contrasting against the rest of quite a monotone sort of image to really lift it and give it a bit more impact. Now you can use this trick in other scenarios as well. It tends to work better though on less colourful scenes, I would say, and more overcast conditions. But another example here is one that I took at Buttermere a few years ago. This is one of my favourite images, and this again is using brightly coloured, contrasty foregrounds against a sort of moodier background where they can play off each other a bit more. So yeah, using sharply contrasting colours or textures in your foreground can work really well. So this last one's a little bit of a two-parter. The first bit is that you're probably too far away from your subject. This sounds like a bit of an obvious one, but you'd be amazed how many times I see people putting the wide lens on, trying to compose a foreground, and then standing 10 foot away from it and shooting it at chest height or head height. Now that can often be quite a lazy approach to doing things. It's easy to just sort of plonk the tripod down and just compose everything from a comfortable level. What you'll find is that often the more interesting wide angle photographs are shot where you've actually almost right on top of the subject. So a lot of the time you do need to be a lot closer than you think. I was saying earlier in that first section about your wide angle foregrounds typically take up about 2/3 of the image. So getting close to that subject and really exaggerating those features is really going to play to the strength of a wide lens. This example on the screen I'm showing you, the area in the foreground looks quite big and prominent, but the actual behind the scenes shot that you can see here, the size of that rock is only about maybe the size of maybe a basketball, something like that. It's not very big, but you can really draw more attention to your subject by getting on top of it and really getting close and bringing those features out. You can see all the little textures and patterns in the rock there that you wouldn't be able to see if you were just stood 6 foot away at chest height. It just would lose all impact. So get closer to your subject, I would say, as a rule. Not all the time, but more times than you would think. Now the second part of this, and the bit that I'll close with here, is that it needs to be interesting. Now I was saying there that the clues in the title, foreground interest, it has to be interesting. You've got to do this stuff with a level of intent in your image making. It should never just be an afterthought. If you feel like a foreground isn't going to work because the subject isn't interesting enough or it doesn't complement the wider scene, take a step back, have a look at the composition, put on a different lens and look at the scene in a different way. If you're just making compromises by putting things in a foreground just to fill the area, then really that's not going to work. And what I find with even quite experienced photographers is that they get stuck on this idea that just putting something in the foreground just for the sake of doing it is really not going to further your development in your photography. So keep in mind when you're composing your foreground, is it interesting? Ask yourself that, because if it's not interesting, then it probably won't work. So yeah, hopefully you found those tips of use. Don't get used to them, because I don't do an awful lot of this sort of stuff on YouTube. What I always say to people when they ask me this question about doing educational stuff is that one, I'd rather be out in the landscape than behind a desk, but more importantly, I resent the idea of giving this stuff away for free. So if you want to learn more, by all means come on a workshop or do a Zoom session or something like that. But for now, you won't really see too much of this stuff on my channel. Just a quick one also before I go, just to let you know who won the print from my last video. I'll put the winner at the bottom here. Well done to you, and I'll be reaching out for your address in the next few days so we can get that across to you. And the second thing is, if you've ordered a calendar from me, they are going to be going out in the next couple of days. I've just been given some word from the printer that they're getting shipped to me now. Been a little bit of a delay getting them to me, like a lot of things in the world at the minute, especially in this country with shipping and stuff. There's been a lot of postal strikes, and it's just delayed them a little bit. But fear not, if you've ordered the calendar, you will be receiving that soon. So I'm going to let you go. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video and found it useful, and I'll catch you on the next one.